In today's lesson, we're going to cover some advanced blues rhythm guitar concepts. We're going to go over 4 different performances and break down the key elements to help you add some sophistication to your rhythm playing. Let's get into it. So this first performance relies heavily on these rootless 9th chord voicings. These voicings are made up of the major 3rd, the flat 7, the 9th, and the 5th. And one of the things I like to do with these is to take this middle part and slide it up a whole step. Then you go from the flat 7, 9, and the 5th up to the root, 3rd, and 6th. So you get this major 6 chord sound. And then we can go with our first finger up here and grab the root. This is a really common thing you hear guys like T-Bone Walker do when they're playing rhythm guitar. And we can take this and move it through the 3 chords of the blues. So we can move it up to a C9 and up to a D9. And there's all kinds of variations you can do with the rhythmic phrasing of that. But it's just a great little trick to take this basic chord and give it some movement and create a little fill that fits neatly in between soloing lines or vocal phrases. The other thing we're doing in this example is a lot of chromatic movement of these chords. One of the things I like to do and is really common is to move this chord up a half step. You hear T-Bone Walker do this on tunes like Stormy Monday. And basically when you move this chord up a half step, what you're doing is kind of implying an altered 5 chord. A lot of times in the bass movement on songs like this, the bass is going to be moving from the 1 up to the 5 and back to the 1. So kind of 1 chord to the 5 chord to the 1 chord. And this G9 chord moved up a half step is actually a voicing of a D altered chord, right? We've got the flat 7, we've got the major 3rd, we've got the flat 13 and the flat 9. So a really colorful altered dominant voicing. But that's basically, we're kind of implying that sound. So we could, if we were soloing over that chord, we would play like a D altered scale. So if you're playing something, G blues, and the rhythm player goes up to that chord and you're wondering what to play, playing a D altered scale over that chord works perfectly. But as a rhythm concept, right, it's really nice to move that chord up chromatically. The other chromatic move we can do, and this is a classic T-Bone Walker thing, is to kind of move down a half step and up a half step from that G9 chord. So we're starting down a half step, up to the G9, up a half step, and then back to the G9, and then aggressively stabbing that root note on the high E string. So So in this next performance, we're going to add some 2-5-1s into this progression, and really just some functioning dominant chords, which we already kind of hinted at in the last performance. But basically a 2-5-1 is just a cadence that you can use to resolve to different chords in the progression. It's really common to use a 2-5-1 to go to the 4 chord. So if we're playing blues in G and we want to go to the C7 chord or the C9 chord, we would play a 2-5-1 in the key of C, which would be D minor 7, then some type of G7, usually some kind of altered voicing, and then resolve to our C7 or our C9. So that's one really common use of a 2-5-1, and honestly, that's just a great way to get to the 4 chord. But we can also use this to get back to the 1 chord. We can use it to get to the 5 chord, any of these things. So, you just have to look at the chord you're going to. If we want to do a 2-5-1 to G7, we would do A minor 7, D7 or D altered, and we could use that altered voicing we played before, and then get to G7. So playing that kind of hinting at that D altered chord was kind of using a functioning dominant chord to pull our ear back to that G7, right? And we can do the same thing going to the 5 chord if we wanted to, right? We could play a, kind of a 6-2-5 type of thing. That's really common. Some of those things, if the band is not doing it with you, it's going to maybe clash a little bit. The 2-5-1 going to the 4 chord really works great. In this particular backing track, the bass is not doing that. I'm just sort of implying that in the rhythm part, and it works really well. And it works really well in your soloing too. You can come up with lines out of those 2-5-1s. Right, to add some sophistication and color to a blues. So this performance, we're kind of adding the 2-5-1 element into what we previously played. But basically, just different types of altered voicings for that G7 chord. You could play that type of rootless voicing with flat 7, major 3rd, flat 13, sharp 9. You could also play the flat 9, which honestly, you hear a lot of people doing these kind of chromatic movements with their 9th chords like we did here. I mean, you hear people going to the 4 chord and just going down from a half step above. That chord a half step above is an altered 5 chord. If we look at this chord in terms of G, we've got the flat 5 or the sharp 11, which is part of the altered scale, part of the G altered scale. We've got the flat 7, the major 3rd, the flat 13, and the flat 9. So all notes that fit in that G altered scale or that A flat melodic minor scale. So these things that we've heard a million times and kind of take for granted really have a deeper harmonic function. So this next performance takes a lot of inspiration from a great performance in video by Robben Ford. I'll put a link down in the description to the actual video. But he plays these incredible voice leading kind of chord movements over a basic 1-4-5 blues. And it's some really hip stuff. So I took a few little snippets from his performance and added them into this part. But one of the really cool things he does is over the 4 chord, he kind of plays this really nice pickup leading into the 4 chord where he plays like a C 13 chord with flat 7 third, 13 and 9 on top, and then a flat 13 chord or like an augmented 7th chord, and then down to our rootless 9 voicing. So you could finger that different ways. You could also play with that note on top, that D flat note on top. And then from the 4 chord here, he plays C9, then like a C sus chord, or you could look at this as a B flat triad over a C bass note. And then he plays this, which I always kind of look at this chord as a G minor major 7 chord. But you could look at it as, a C with a flat 7, a 9, a sharp 11, and a 13 on top. It's just a really cool, colorful chord. And then up to kind of the top part of like a F9 chord. So really interesting harmony. Right, but has a real build to it. It really builds some tension, and those chords kind of voice lead into one another. Kind of a cool thing. It's something that, you got to be careful with those voicings if you're playing with another guitar player or a keyboard player, and kind of, playing it in a way that it's not going to clash. Playing some of those things with a lighter touch and not too heavy-handed can be helpful. But that's a great little movement and just a great little thing that he played that I love. The other thing that I got from his performance is going to the 5 chord, the sort of turnaround section. He plays these voicings, which are, really, really great voicings. This is like a kind of like a 6-9 chord. If you're looking at this as, C walking up to D, we've got the 6, the 9, the 5th, and the root. Right, if you put a D bass note in the bottom, right, a really pretty chord. Kind of nice because it doesn't have a third in it, and it's kind of vague. It doesn't have a flat 7. It's kind of an open sounding chord. Right, and he uses the same thing for C. So he goes, and then grabs this. You could look at this as like a D flat 13 chord, or you could look at it as just a G 7 sharp 9 chord, And then he goes up a half step and back down. So again, building a lot of tension, really something that's, kind of building some anticipation that really needs to resolve. And again, the kind of thing that you got to be careful with, but if it works and it fits, it can be really cool and really effective. so this last performance is going to move up even higher up the fretboard, and we're going to use another very classic voicing and one of my favorite voicings to use for a G7 chord or a G9 chord, and that's this voicing where we've got the flat 7, the 9, the major third, and the root on top. It's a cool voicing because you've got the 9 and the major third, these two notes that are separated by a whole step in the chord. So it has this very kind of clustery sound to it. And we can move this third up a half step and grab the fourth. So then from here, I come down to basically like a G13 chord to a G9 chord, and then this is like a G sharp 9 chord, G7 sharp 9 chord. So again, kind of an altered thing, that altered 5 chord leading to the 4 chord. And again, it's sort of a chromatic movement because I'm playing a C13 chord. You move that up a half step, you might just think, oh, it's just, a simple half step movement, but really it's this altered 5 chord resolving. So again, if you were soloing over that and wanted to really outline that chord, you would play, the G altered scale. Right, so. Right, so that's, understanding the rhythm and understanding the harmony in these chords helps you all the way through improvising solos as well. But basically, yeah. Just a really nice move. And you can use this, I use this kind of thing in all different types of grooves. That's another thing you can work on with these little movements is playing them over different types of groups. Here we're playing kind of a slow 12/8, slow blues type of thing. But all this stuff works great if you're playing a shuffle or a swing, Right, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I encourage you to try all this stuff out in different ways. I know this is a little bit of a more advanced lesson. I'm kind of moving through this stuff a little more quickly. But the thing with these types of concepts is really it's about listening to the performances. Like all my lessons, I'm going to have all these performances tabbed out and notated. I'll put this backing track up on my Patreon site, so go check that out. But yeah, this is the kind of thing you've got to listen to it. You've got to kind of hear it and get into the feel of it. But understanding the interval relationships, and that's kind of why I didn't go over the specific note names to every chord, because when I'm playing this stuff and thinking about it, I'm really thinking about interval relationships, and so it's important to know that as well as the note names. So check out the Patreon site for the transcriptions of these performances, and until next time, happy practicing and take care.